Welcome back to Specially Speaking. We know it's been a hot second now since we've posted and recorded. So it's really great to be back in our little space,
Our little bubble.
our little home away from home. Well, it's not home away for Liz, but it's home away for me. We just want to give you guys an update on how our episodes are going to be formatted going forward. So we got a lot of feedback over whilst the content has been really, really great and really enjoyable, it is very long. So going forward, we're going to aim to have like 30-ish minute episodes just so that you guys can get the information. And if we have to, we'll break the episodes into two so that it's more digestible and like accessible for everybody because we know sitting down for like an hour plus is definitely one, time consuming, and two, you know, not always reasonable. So I have set myself a pretty little timer to make sure that we don't go over. With that being said, now that we kind of got the logistics out of the way, we are going to dive right on in with our topic for today, which is strategies for learners, mastering the art of learning.
Becoming a sensei of
I like that though. We're senseis of education. All teachers are senseis of education.
right. And this information is not only for educators, it's also for parents, tutors,
Absolutely.
and anybody else who is either already in the field of education or thinking about becoming an educator. We're just going to give imperative information that's going to give you an understanding of how students or people learn in general.
Absolutely. Because it's very different for every person. The way I learn is definitely different than the way Liz learns and the way, like, let's say a student in front of you learns, especially when you then couple that with a learning disability or need, right? Everybody's different. We don't all learn the same way. We might have some commonalities here and there, but that's what we're going to talk about today. So you can find and utilize the best approach and strategies to utilize with your students or your children. So keep that in mind, right? These are tools to use, right? Consciously or not, like it's things that we use, we take in, we process, we retain, the way to use the information, right? So when students have effective strategies, they're more confident, independent, and successful learners. Without them, though, even the brightest of students can struggle to reach their full potential. I realize I forgot how to start.
No, it's okay. But how we should add to this is simply say, don't get overwhelmed by the number of strategies that you either hear or learn in a professional development or really try to implement. Strategies are going to be ever evolving, and you're going to be modifying strategies that you've learned either online, professional developments, or even in conversations with other educators and parents. There might be some points of the strategies that might be effective for your learner, but there are other strategies out there. So it's always like, and I always say this in interviews and doing presentations, think of strategies like ongoing research project. You always have to go back to the board or always go back to the basics if a particular strategy that you have implemented is not going to be as successful as you would have hoped, or there was a particular part of the strategy that was more effective than others. So we just want to preference by saying before we tackle this and give you a whole bunch of resources and ideas that not all strategies are going to work. Not all strategies are going to look the same because the learners are different. So with that being said, let's just dive right into it.
All right. So, Liz, let's talk a little bit about the science of learning and memory retention.
Yes, and attention, encoding, connection, storage, retrieval. That's all under the umbrella of understanding how learning works. And please, like I had said previously, learning is individualized. And you might be a teacher in a classroom full of 30 students with one objective, the objective they make you put on the board. Parents, teachers have to show this objectives for observations or for students to know ahead of time what's to be expected. But how do we do that with all different learners in a classroom of 30 kids or 25 kids or even more than just two kids, right?
Yeah.
If you are a special education teacher and you do small pullouts, you might have 5 students, but all of those 5 students have different learning abilities.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of the time it comes down to knowing the needs of your learners. I feel like that's like the catch catchphrase.
I think that's the first thing you should do. As a parent, you already know how your child learns because whether they listen or not, or they're listening to you, but they're not going to perform what you are requesting of them. And as a teacher as well, special education, you have a document to explain a learner. Others, you really have to take the time out to really get to know that child. So how is that child going to retrieve the information? How are we going to make sure that they understand the information based on practical usage, right? So different learning styles, visually, auditory, kinesthetically, reading and writing, that's going to look different per child.
Yeah.
Growth mindset versus fixed mindset. Well, what's a growth mindset? The belief that you can do something in order to retain information and utilize it versus a fixed mindset where it's repetition after repetition, and I'm going to utilize the same strategy over and over and over again because it's formulating a structure that will support the learner's understanding.
Yeah. I guess in my mind, whenever I hear growth mindset, right, I think of literally that. There are multiple ways of achieving the goal, and you're going to keep trying each and every one until you get to said goal or objective, right? Whereas a fixed mindset is very much like, this is the structure I'm using, and I'm going to keep using, and like, for lack of a better word, fuck it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but I'm going to keep using that, and I'm not going to deviate from that, which unfortunately a lot of people, I think, fall into that category a lot of the time based off of just what they've learned either in programs or trainings, and they're like, I've got to follow this structure. I have to, like, this is the box. I have to do these X, Y, or Z things, but that doesn't reach every kid, right? It might work for some, sure. Like, don't get me wrong, it might work for some, but it doesn't reach every kid, and it's very limiting. And that's how you fall into that fixed mindset because you don't think with a growth mindset of what can I do to push this box that they gave me, this set of instructions? What can I do to add to it in order to reach those other 5, 10 kids in my classroom that aren't getting it based off of this little list that I've given.
So before you implement said strategies and while you're taking the time out in this learning process to really identify who that learner is, think about what avenue you want to go. Do you want the growth mindset because you know that this student has the ability but just needs the positive motivation and accommodations given to the individual? Or is it a fixed mindset? You know the diagnosis of this child. You know my child needs structure. You know my child needs directions, whether it's orally or written in a style of repetition. So you have that already. So if you're starting out and you're saying, okay, I have a list of these phenomenal strategies or methods and practices that I want to utilize, get to know what mindset that child has already come into your classroom with or has already displayed when learning a new concept at home or anywhere at home, playing organized sports. What kind of mindset do we want to go ahead and portray within that individual learner so that way I can be free to utilize numerous strategies? But there are essential strategies for effective learning, and we have broken them down to active learning, space, repetition, interleaving, elaboration, and chunking.
Love a good chunk.
I love chunking. So if we start with active learning, engaging with materials instead of passively reading, this is going to look like a multisensory approach. Explain to me in a classroom, because you've had a classroom where you've had to utilize a multisensory approach. What does that look like with older kids? And then I'll give you an example with younger students.
Oh, see, my first one that came to mind was when I worked with younger kids. Now you just get me on the spot of thinking about my older ones.
It's easier to say it for the younger.
So much easier with the little ones because you go, oh, yeah, all the manipulatives you could use, like, with the older ones. Let's see. I think, okay, so I used to do this really fun thing with the kids where I would almost like, this is going to sound really nerdy in about 2.5. So like Dungeons and Dragons, but not Dungeons and Dragons. And you give them like, it's a historical time, right? And you give them a person that was alive then. They have to do research on that person, but they have to be that person, right? And it's like a game, so they can earn points and things like that. But they have to act like historically relevant to how that person would have responded. They have to write and like give little speeches, like that. Right. Like it makes the learning
engaging, like they're first person.
They're the ones. It's active, like right? They're in the seat of history at that point, right? And it's just so much fun. to do with them, and they like at first they're like obviously what teenagers like, oh yeah, I want to definitely be somebody in the suffrage movement in 19 and 20s. But once they get into it, like, oh my god, they're like different people, literally, because they have to act as different people. But it's very engaging and very fun. Like at least it's a history example. Obviously, you can utilize that also for English with characters in books where they have to
plays. They can act out the plays. I was able to observe that in one of your classrooms where you guys were acting out, and they were into it. I mean, they didn't have the accent down, or they couldn't memorize the script, but they were into it, and they were able to learn very effectively. With the younger students, everything for us is tactile, tangibles, and multisensory things, and everything that you can think of, especially for math when you're utilizing tangible manipulatives, or in reading when you're utilizing visual organizers, graphic organizers. A lot of curriculums now these days have that dual active learning where you have games to support curriculum, or you have videos, or even interactive videos. A lot of online curriculums have a space for interaction. So active learning can look like anything in your classroom and or home.
As long as it's multisensory, right? That's the whole thing.
Yes. Space repetition, using intervals to reinforce learning. That is going to be utilized for memory, strategies, songs, acronyms, visual.
Like days of the week.
That's the very space repetition that you do. That is the circle time is what we're talking about. And if you don't have the opportunity to have circle time because out of elementary school, you go into something else. What used to work for me is I would give the students the expectations of the day in repetition. Because for some of my students, if I just went into curriculum, how long is this going to be? What are we going to do? What goes next? What are we doing at 11 o'clock?
Are we done yet?
Wait. But if I provided them with the expectations and they already know the routine and rules of my classroom, there's no room for questions. And for some students, they need that. They need to know about their time and space, because a lot of my students needed structure and regimen based on their diagnosis. Can you give me an example? And I always love to use her for an example in high school, because the challenges with teenagers that have their own opinions and bias.
I've taught many of them at this point in my career. I like how you're just like, let me throw you another high school example.
I love the high school
days of the week when I taught kindergarten. She's like, no, you know what? I'm going to do the heavy lifting. Figure it out for fucking high school students now. Let me hear it.
Well, a lot of these times we have a lot of resources and strategies, and they're more geared towards the younger educational student because it's foundations, right? But what do we do in middle school? What do we do in high school when they're more vocal? They have an opinion, whether it's a good or bad one.
Yeah. I mean, I still like a good song.
I mean, yeah.
They will vibe for music, legit. Like it doesn't matter if it's not whatever I don't even know what a popular artist is for them now at this point. Change every week, but music definitely. Visual organizers to a degree, but visual organizers that are engaging and
interactive.
Like you can't give them a piece of paper and be like, here it is. Like things that are interactive. I also like memes.
How so?
You mean how so? Memes.
Yeah,
a good historical meme, and then tell them to listen, leave me alone. I like my memes. But you know what I'm saying? Like it reinforces what you're doing. So if you tell, like, let's say you have a lecture and you're talking about World War I, right? And then I throw in a meme in the middle of the slide, like that's going to reinforce it because you're more likely at a teenage age to remember SpongeBob and something stupid when I'm talking about World War I than you are from me talking about World War I.
And usually that's a matter of interest or lack of understanding about. That's great. Interleaving is our next one, mixing up subjects for better retention. This goes hand in hand with the chunking. So I'm just going to drop to the chunking, breaking information up into smaller, manageable parts, chunking information for them just to understand. I think that chunking works best if it's communicated with the kids that is the way we're going. A lot of kids will understand that. Let's use mathematics, for example. We'll understand you need to learn how to count in numerical order. You need to do quantity. Then you go up to the adding. Then you can do the subtract. So you're building. And when you break things up into chunks, it helps them grab an understanding to create an ownership
Yeah.
for them to be able to move on. Perfect example, online learning. I'm going to preference this a lot because we do have parents who are the educators in their home. How do you break up chunking online learning when you only have a set amount of time with that student? Who's to say in that set amount of time I have to cover everything? Who's to say that chunking doesn't involve moving at the student's pace?
I feel like chunking is honestly the more beneficial way to go, especially just kind of tying it back with that growth mindset. Like it's hand in hand, really honestly, versus well, I've got to get all of this in this 60 minutes, so that's it. That's that fixed mindset, right? So chunking very much.
Yes, and
Like,
chunking could look different. Yeah, chunking could look different with curriculum. Chunking could look different with scheduling, right?
Yeah.
The scheduling for students in brick and mortar is very regimented, right? The scheduling in a home is not, unless you have that parent that needs that because there is employment and other moving
It
parts.
still gives more flexibility.
Yeah, there's more leniency with that. But again, the whole perception about chunking is really moving it to the pace of the students and giving them partial concepts, not the entire concepts. Now, this is not going to be the case with everybody, but if you have a student or a child that has difficulty retaining information, which a lot of students do, whether they're diagnosed or not, retaining a large amount of information, even for me when I'm studying for an exam or I'm studying for a presentation, I have to break it up. I have to definitely put an outline together. And that's what an outline simply is. It's
just
chunking information. And so the last one about essential strategies is elaboration, explaining the concepts. And this is going to be most time consuming of the strategies.
But it's explaining the concept in your own words.
Or in the vocabulary of the
good old vernacular of the children in which you're working with, which is so much fun with teenagers. Because man, the slang that you can incorporate into a lesson.
I mean, I'm not even up on that, but with elaboration, the whole premise behind it is really making learning meaningful for retention that connects to the student's real life scenario, real life situations. So, for example, let's say, oh gosh, I was really horrible in mathematics and I just couldn't relate to it. It was so black and white. And I'm like, no, but you can do it this way. And now it's different. Now there's multiple modalities on how to solve one problem.
Yeah.
But I needed something meaningful. And so I would always use an example. Like my teacher would always say food, because you could do the fractions with pizzas, old school.
Oh, yeah. Or Hershey's.
Baking.
Yeah.
Right? You're breaking up concepts. Yeah. So I just say that to say that I had a great teacher who knew that I was struggling with that, but who also knew that I was a foodie.
Yeah.
And so she gave me some of those complex, it was fractions, and she gave me the visuals.
Yeah.
Regarding so again, I say with elaboration, it's like, all right, you want to talk that slang with those kids? That's great. But if we're talking slang while we're working or learning something, then I can try it with you. I can be cool. It might be in a different context because some of the slang are not grammatically correct.
With math, but you see, you don't use you don't use those. Like you use things like okay.
But that's hard to change,
You find a scenario that has like two opposing people, and you'd be like, yeah, so like I'm gonna use
you and I, you versus me.
No, like an actual I'm trying to think of a really good historical example where I can throw the word op in real quick. Like, right, we're the United States of America, and our op is Nazi Germany and Japan. Like, those are our ops.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, but you gotta fight. Like, they keep talking about you, and they're coming at you, and now your op Japan just bombed Pearl Harbor. So what are you gonna do? Like, you gotta square up, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you see? So, I mean,
it's vernacular.
I think the history is a little bit easier to like kind of.
You know what's really good with elaboration? Debate.
Yeah.
Even in any subject, it doesn't have to be history, politics, or anything.
Yeah,
it could be the mathematical debate, right? Because you're showing two different ways to get one solution.
I'm very glad that you keep bringing STEM into this because my brain goes history. It's fine.
And I don't really like.
I know we're the two two opposite sides of, she got all the STEM stuff. I'm over here with all my humanities. I'll stay right here.
But alongside of essential strategies, study. How do we get them to now? All of these strategies we're supporting, we're implementing, we're accommodating. There is a time in a child's learning process, whether it's in the classroom right after the instruction or whether it's at home for practice, where there has to be independent practice, practical application because you understood the information that we gave you. So, what are the studying techniques for different types of learners? So, let's go visual learner first.
Yeah.
What is the study technique for that?
Mind maps, diagrams, color coding. I like to highlighters.
Visual. Anything that you can think of. Glitter, stars.
Don't do glitter. Don't, unless you want it everywhere. Don't do glitter. She loves glitter.
Glitter, stars, stickers, charts. Teachers paid by teachers have great visual charting, visual organizers. And then again, if you want to look at something more interactive online, there are a lot of online resources that we are going to provide at the end of this that you can utilize for that. Auditory learners is another type of learner.
Yes. Podcasts.
Reading out loud, text to speech, speech to text.
Yeah.
Having those debate discussions, right?
Yeah.
I found it very effective when I started a debate or I started a context in class, walked away and had two students oppose back and forth. For me as an educator, that was the reinforcement that I knew that child knows what he's talking about or they understood it. And it got really heated. Like students would, have that vernacular of cursing or,
Yeah.
But they were understanding the context, right? How about kinesthetic learners, those with the heebie-jeebies like you?
They love a good hands-on activity. See, science. See, now I can give science examples. Like we did one earlier this school year where we were talking about meiosis and mitosis. And we had them do activities with Oreos and sprinkles. That was fun. It shows me
were they able to eat it after?
They did. I let them eat it. Some of them loaded up on the frosting because they were like, "I'm getting to eat this later, so I'm just gonna make it how I want to." But at least it shows you if they actually understood the process of cell division, right? So, because if you weren't able to set that up correctly, like.
Now, there are going to be some topics and some subjects that are not as exciting as that. So what do you do for that active kinesthetic learner that needs that integration?
I think you can, honestly, and I think these two go hand in hand, auditory learning and kinesthetics, because you can do songs for learning for other subjects, like if I'm thinking about math or English, but like even history, like songs, and then pair it with hand movements, because then they're more likely to remember the words because it's tied to hand.
Yeah, and a lot of songs on YouTube have memorized dance movements to go with that as well. And I also think a lot of the accommodations that you're going to implement are important for those kinesthetic learners, like breaks. We're giving them a fidget toy. Because fortunately enough, they can do two things at once.
Yes.
Without even knowing. So really with the kinesthetic learners is just study the child's movements, study how they perceive information or how they even receive information. What do they need to do to understand the information that's being given to them? And then I think the reading and writing learners. What's that?
Note takers. You're a good note taker.
I love that.
It's a good note taker.
I love
everywhere.
That.
There's
colors.
Like, if you could see it, there's notes everywhere. Like she's got just notes.
I love
notes all over the
index cards. And those are going to be trial and error. Honestly, note-taking strategies, summarizing, journaling. Those are trial and error once you get to know who your student is. If you feel like the student likes to do recordings instead of writing, then you're going to implement something with that. If you feel like they really love taking notes, then you're going to be more conscious what you're putting on the board or how you're putting it on the board. Really, when you're talking about reading and writing learners, you're really talking about structuring the information so that they're able to receive and understand that information according to how they structurize that.
Absolutely,
how are they putting that into content? For them to either go back to review it because they got to study for an exam, or for them to listen to the instruction or to the class again. I don't encourage students to wait to college to utilize those strategies. I like to encourage that early on, as early as elementary. Math notes. I utilize a lot of math notes because there's a lot of steps and processes that students can go back to, especially in algebra when we're dealing with multi-step solutions. I need math notes. So
see how I'm struggling every time she says math? Like my brain switches off. It's like, no, not math. Never the math.
But the next falling in line would be time management and productivity tips. Well, when you're in brick and mortar, your time management is your schedule.
Your schedule, yeah, you have no choice. You've got those time parameters, and that's it. You have damn well better fall into them, or else you're probably getting a talking to afterwards.
What have we seen a lot in the classroom when it comes to time management? Classroom management.
Yeah, you spend more time on classroom management than you do on.
So you have to figure out
the balance between the two.
Exactly, because if you only have a 45-minute block for reading, and you have a disruptive student in there, or you have a couple of disruptive students in there, then you have to educate the rest of those students. What strategies are you implementing for not only time management, but classroom management? What is the mental and learning overload? What is the structure you're creating? How are you adapting your learning environment? That all is going to help you with creating a structure for study, whether it's me standing in front of the classroom for 10 minutes to get the initial information out, whether it's exit, or what is it when they come in and they have to do their do nows for 5 minutes in the classroom, their entries or their exits to show that they understood the concept of what was taught that day, right? The Pomodoro technique. No, the Pomodoro technique for focused study session.
That's all you, Miss PhD.
Wow. PhD. No way. I want to just go on and say that I am going to, this is going to be helpful. You see how she puts me on the spot?
I didn't do anything. Yeah. You said, yeah, I didn't do anything. You're the one who brought it up. I sat here like, yeah, that's all I knew.
Well, what I will say about that, it's really going to focus on the learner, particularly once you first, for this technique, before I go into this technique, you have to know who the learner is. You can implement a technique, and even though it's a simple time management strategy technique, this is not always going to be effective. How it works, it's a 5-step technique. The first one is you choose your task. And if you're an educator, you already know what your task is because you have your lesson plan to go off of. You set a timer for 25 minutes. Now, I want to preference by saying that some educational institutions, such as charter school, already have this implemented. It's not called a Pomodoro technique, but it is a technique that they utilize with timing and knowing that the structure of the classroom is being time managed correctly for all learners. You set a timer up for 25 minutes. I know in the charter school, what is the entrance work? 10 minutes?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. You can do this based on the amount of kids that are in your classroom. If you are working on a one-to-one basis, you might only need 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
You work with full focus time rings. There's no time for anything else. You're focusing on the concept and context itself. You're just going through what you need to go through so that you attack the objective. You take a short 5-minute break, and this is going to be especially helpful for your kinesthetic learners, your ADHDers, your ADDs, your dyslexia students. And then after 4 Pomodoros, which is going through this step, you take a longer break to recharge. So all this technique is really like, stop. This technique really is to support you in repetition so that you can create a structure if you do not already have one at home, in school, or any other learning environment, even for tutors, right? This is to get the students acclimated to the expectations so that they're able to identify what they need to do in that time period of 40 minutes reading break, because that seems to be a long time.
Oh, it is a long time to sit and do anything.
I'm just going to put my administrator hat on. For me, I like to see this when I'm going in and doing observations because I know exactly what I'm walking into.
Yeah.
And it helps. This is the very basic. For me, I think that this method is very basic to establish classroom management. Avoiding procrastination and management distractions. How many times are you going to tell a kid to sit down? How many times are you going to go over the same information.
Well, sit down at that point. You're going to be standing and learning at that point. As I said, there's only so many times I'm going to say it. I think some of these things can also, it's good to leverage your, like, whatever it is, team, things like that, like whatever your support team, like if it's a student with IQ, like your support that you have, leveraging that in those moments. Also, if you like utilize some of these techniques, procrastination is less likely to be a thing, right? Like if you find ways of getting your students engaged in the learning, they're more likely not going to be procrastinating to do anything that you're asking them to do, especially if they're interested and engaged. Get me like that.
See, I'm not interested or engaged.
Oh, yes, I see that. Oh,
Also, let me just preference, if you want more information about the Pomodoro technique, let us know. Hit us up because we can send you more information, especially the beneficial factors of implementing that technique.
Or you can always ask our good homegirl here on this podcast, ChatGPT. She'll be more than willing to help you out as well.
And say please and thank you.
Make sure you say please and thank you.
One of the other management and productivity tips, and this is probably the most popular, you've heard this in every professional development, is SMART learning goals. And SMART is an acronym for what?
Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound.
So, I mean, again, those are just ways that you can follow. You can clearly define what your expectations are within that. You can measure the goal, whether the child is perceiving that information correctly or needs additional support. Is the goal realistic? Are your lesson plans realistic? Are you going to get to them? Are you going to get to that content? Is it relevant? Is it, needs the purpose of, what you're actually learning about, whether the day before, the day after, is it going to be a building subject matter? Time bound, again, going back to the time. If you have lesson plans, then you have time expectations.
Yeah.
If you don't, and then you're working on a one-to-one, put those time limit expectations for yourself, and also so that you can inform the student. It's, if you go into the room, okay, we have 40 minutes of reading. What does 40 minutes of reading look like?
Yeah.
Does that mean that I have to sit down and read for 40 minutes?
Oh, well,
break it up.
I guess it depends on who you are. For some, 40 minutes of reading sounds like bliss. When you say 40 minutes of math, absolutely not. So
I can even teach 40 minutes of math. That's a lot. So this is our first part of our video.
Yep.
Again, anything within our context in the first part of the video and you would like additional information or just more robust information than what we're covering, because we're trying to have time management. See, we're utilizing
our SMART goals.
Let us know. Hit us up, and we'll see you in part 2.
We'll see you then. Bye.
Bye.